In a major show of unity, the leaders of France, Germany and the UK and Poland are heading to Kyiv. French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk will hold talks with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The four leaders are calling for an immediate 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine and have vowed to ramp up pressure on Russia if it refuses. French President Emmanuel Macron also wants a joint US-Europe plan to enforce the truce with massive sanctions. Meanwhile, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico defied EU warnings and met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Fico said that it was an honor to attend Russia's World War II memorial. He pledged to veto any EU energy embargo on Russia. Putin used the Moscow parade to draw parallels between Russia's war and the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany. He praised troops fighting in Ukraine and accused the West of Russophobia. Russia says it backs a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, but the Kremlin wants key conditions addressed first. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said the idea came from Ukraine and the US, but requires clarity on what a ceasefire means. Here's what the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov had to say.
Эта тема, она же давно вбрасывалась украинской стороной, и, если вы знаете, тема перемирия, собственно, как только она была озвучена администрацией Трампа, она была поддержана президентом Путиным с оговоркой о том, что вокруг идеи перемирия существует огромное количество нюансов, не найдя ответа на которые предметно говорить очень сложно.
Meanwhile, Russian President Putin praised Russian troops fighting in Ukraine at Moscow's World War II parade, attended by allies including China's Xi Jinping. In Washington, US President Donald Trump urged both leaders to end this stupid war. Here's what he said.
Message for both parties: get this war ended. We're losing 5,000 soldiers a week, Russian and Ukrainian soldiers, and other people also, by the way. And I say, get this stupid war finished. That's my message.
The White House also confirmed a productive call between Trump and Zelenskyy. The White House said both sides are in talks with hopes that a ceasefire deal could be reached soon. Here is what Caroline Leavitt, White House press secretary, had to say.
Yesterday, President Zelenskyy called the president to tell him that the critical minerals deal had passed the parliament in Ukraine. I talked to the president about that call. He said it was very good and productive, and of course the critical minerals deal is great for Ukraine, but also of course for the United States of America and our taxpayers here. It was a good call, and they also spoke about, of course, this ceasefire that the president proposed, the 30-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, which we know Europe is on board with, and we hope both countries.
We're now joined by Jim Rice, Professor of International Law, located in Vigan, the Philippines. Thank you very much for joining us, Jim, as always. I want to talk about this meeting between Friedrich Merz, between Prime Minister Keir Starmer, between the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and French President Emmanuel Macron. Do you think it's a coincidence that this coincides with the sort of anti-West sentiment that's went on in Moscow, particularly yesterday, with all these world leaders gathering in the Red Square to celebrate and support Russia's operation in Ukraine?
Thanks for having me on. No, I agree with your point. I think this is not a coincidence at all. I think that the meeting of these very pro-Western democratic leaders, including Macron and Keir Starmer, the Polish president, they are showing solidarity with Ukraine against this aggressive war, which was unilaterally launched by Putin over 3 years ago. So I think it's important that they're meeting, and I think that it sends a message also to the United States, to the Trump administration.
And that was my next question, Jim. I was going to say, what message does this send to the mediator, the United States, to President Trump?
Well, I think that as I said just a moment ago, it sends a message of solidarity that our Western allies, that our NATO allies, are going to stand strong and stand united against Putin with the people of Ukraine, regardless of what Trump does or what Trump says. It's very easy for him to refer to it as a stupid war, but it seems to me that the Trump administration and Trump himself are just expressing frustration following his false campaign promise that he could end this war in less than 24 hours.
Jim, and Russia does say it backs a 30-day ceasefire along with the Ukraine and the US, but has obviously asked for concessions from Ukraine and conditions. Do you see this agreement getting over the line at some point soon?
Well, there's a couple of things here. First of all, Putin has got a very, very poor record of honoring any ceasefires that he himself has agreed to. So that's one thing right there. I doubt very much whether Putin will agree or observe the conditions of any ceasefire, be it 3 days or 30 days. But in addition to that, the demands that Putin has been imposing are completely unrealistic, and even J.D. Vance has acknowledged that himself. They're basically demanding even more territory, Ukrainian territory, than the Russians have been able to seize by their long 3-year bloody conquest. In addition to that, they're demanding that Ukraine will never become a part of NATO, that even European peacekeepers will not be allowed to observe any future peace. So I think that any demands that Peskov says or Putin says are unrealistic.
Yes, Jim Rice, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you.